Hello, and welcome to this lecture on the area of performance evaluation and incentives. Let's start by looking at this chart, which you're not going to see on your screen here, but is in your notes, and looking at the whole performance management system. It's about improving service, employee satisfaction, employee motivation, increased productivity, decreased turnover. In the center, you have organizational effectiveness. If you look back to what we talked about earlier on in the semester, in particular with regards to delivering the service that we were after and hiring the right people, you'll see that it comes into the same aspects. So we have issues that we have to deal with here in terms of employee development, goal setting, evaluation, and coaching. Now, a performance model for performance appraisal would be to first identify what it is we want to appraise. What are the measures of the employee work, responsibilities, whatever it may be. Then we have to determine how we're going to measure them. What are the quantitative aspects? What are the qualitative aspects? And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go through it. And then finally, we have to manage what those results are and look at what we actually accomplished. Now, to do that, in today's world, one of the things we think about is trying to do this with a customer-based system. So it's not just about what we think as a manager of an employee or what our manager thinks of us as a manager and so on. It's putting our performance review, which would be that evaluation, together with customer satisfaction. So we're looking at satisfaction data. In particular, let's say a hotel has guest satisfaction surveys and they ask for certain employees who are doing an outstanding job. Being able to measure that, put some kind of measure on it. We also have a lot of systems that hotels are using today for customer satisfaction that identify various departments. So a manager of a department could be set in there. And then we put an employee goal setting, where the employee brings in their goals and what they're going to accomplish. And what they plan to achieve from one period to the next. And we link these to pay. I mean, that's one way to do it. We don't have to do it that way, but in a lot of cases, that's what we think about. You get so much for this, so much for that, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And then another way we discuss is the area of 360-degree feedback. Now, what do we mean by 360-degree feedback? Well, it means that we're not just being evaluated by our manager. We're being evaluated by our peers, by our subordinates, by ourselves, and even in some cases, our customers are being brought into that mix. And particularly in the services industry and hospitality, this is an area where you certainly can do that. It emphasizes teamwork and participation. It's not a one-shot deal. We're not just doing that on our own, and it's not just our manager's view of us. Now, I put in here a point that I want to make with regards to the international side of it, and that is it's difficult to implement a policy like this exactly in Asia. And part of the reason for that is when you think about the Asian cultures. Excuse me for 1 second. Yes, I have my tea even in my recording session. But it's the respect for authority in that if you ask a subordinate to evaluate their superior, they're not going to say negative things. That would not be looked at in a positive sense to them. Peer-to-peer, maybe a little bit, but certainly not from that perspective. And it's even a little bit more difficult to get a self-review, although certainly I've seen that be implemented. But I remember the first time back in the late 80s that Shangri-La tried to bring this into place, and it was resisted a good deal because the feeling was that you should evaluate as a team, not as an individual. So what are we measuring? What is the reward for this aspect of it? Well, we can look at the purpose being to have certain behavioral controls. In other words, if a person is being written up for positive by customers, that is, comments by customers, that's a positive aspect. And if we reward somebody from that standpoint, that's a positive thing. We can compensate, give direct financial incentives. I recall a situation at one time to reinforce good policies in downtown Chicago. Marriott. We had a system where we had a silver dollar, and the silver dollar was in an envelope. And as managers, we were supposed to be watching for various employees who would do a good job. And the system had gone on for a while, and I really hadn't given much out, not because I didn't want to participate, but because I was out and involved with a lot of people all the time. And but one day I was in on a Saturday, and it was a steep stairwell between the first floor and where our offices were. And I watched this cleaner, one of our housekeeping staff, who was vacuuming the steps at that point, and he saw this older woman come up, and he went up to the top of the stairs, met her, and brought her down. Now I went back to my office. I grabbed that envelope with a silver dollar, and I gave that to him. Now, every day that I saw him after that, he always remembered me. He always knew what that was, and I appreciated what he did. So there was a real good value in all that. Recognition programs at work, Employee of the Month, those kind of things are another method, and simply financial rewards, particularly financial rewards for teams. So the front office staff received customer feedback above 95%. So therefore, they get a reward for this month, something of that nature. That's what we mean when we start setting these actual measures and rewarding them from that perspective, or incentivizing them, if you will. Now let's get into talking about the performance review. The performance review, probably many of you have had performance reviews, at least some of you. Frequency of them, the first, generally speaking, is at 90 days. I'm sure you've all heard, you survive for the first 90 days and then you're on board and you do a review at that point. Then typically, most of the time, it's done annually after that. That's how they evaluate us here at USF and all faculty here. But some will actually go to doing it on a semi-annual basis in order to keep more of the behaviors in place. Because when you think about it, if you're only evaluating it once a year, what happens during the rest of the year? Now, it could be a manager-subordinate role where the manager creates this and gives it to the subordinate. Or it may be the other way around, where you give it to the subordinate to do first, and then you as the manager evaluate it. I personally have always preferred that because I've found that most employees actually will rate themselves lower than I might rate them. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of the long form, short form approach. There's some where maybe you have a little bit more involved, particularly if they're managing people or departments and so on, versus someone who maybe just has a role as a manager, but they're not technically managing anybody in a department, say a sales manager or catering manager in a hotel. And the performance review is looked at as a way to set goals for the next review. What do you plan to accomplish the next time so that you can go back and evaluate against them? Now, some of those areas that you might evaluate. First, let's look at the all-employee aspect I'm talking about, whether manager, supervisor, whatever they may be. First, job knowledge and skills. Then maybe quality of the work, and then quantity, their problem-solving abilities, how do they handle guest complaints, initiative and autonomy, can we leave them alone, how are they doing on empowerment, interpersonal communication and teamwork with their fellow members, and maybe customer-focused. Okay, so if we think about that from all of those perspectives, any employee working in a service industry, working in a hotel or restaurant, tourism attraction, whatever it might be, is going to have these various responsibilities that we can measure. Now, going a step further, when I say the long form aspect, and this is how I've typically seen it done, I'm using an example that comes from the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau in my time there. But from a manager standpoint, there's other things that you might have responsibility for. Leadership. How do you evaluate your leadership? Planning and project management, where you're responsible for others. And development of employees. How do the people work for you? Now, there's a point here about this evaluation when you think about it. Remember, we said this one done at 90 days, another one done at a year. What are you evaluating at 90 days? Are you evaluating them on, if we go back a second to this slide and we say, are you evaluating them on their job knowledge and skills at 90 days? Is that what you expect them to have learned at 90 days? So in other words, you could say to a person, you've gone over 100% in terms of what my expectation was of what you would learn in 90 days rather. But if you think about that in a different context, if you think about that as what would you expect the person to know in knowledge and skills when they are at a senior level in that position? Then how would they be doing in 90 days? And as just an evaluation of that point. Now that can make a lot of difference in how somebody rates you. If somebody rates you as, well, could you be rated 100%, perfect, excellent, if you will, of job knowledge and skills at 90 days based on what you were expecting to do at 90 days? I think the answer would be yes, you probably could. Would you expect somebody at 90 days to know what they're supposed to know in a year? Absolutely not. So some people might only give you a satisfactory at that point. And you've been going through school, and you've been working on A's and B's, right? So that's excellent. That's good. That's not satisfactory. So now an employer comes back to you and they say, well, based on what I've seen you do over the first 90 days in your job skills, I think you've done a very satisfactory job. And you go, wait a minute, satisfactory, that's a C. I've been getting A's and B's all this time. So you see there's quite a bit of difference in terms of how people evaluate it. And I can tell you, my superior at the San Jose Convention Bureau, Convention Visitors Bureau that I'm using for this example here, his evaluations were on what he expected you to have when you were ready to be promoted to the next job. So he didn't give above satisfactory in a 90-day aspect of it. And the first time I did a 90-day review, he questioned me when I said someone is doing it at that level. And I said, well, my view of how you do it is different. So I think that's one of the challenges that you might face in terms of how people review. Hard to make them equal. So let's talk about some performance concerns. All right, now you've done the evaluation and things aren't going the way you expected them to in one way or another. So what do you do about it? Well, this little chart I think is a great one because it's a simplified method of saying what you do, but it also gets right to the point. So let's say the reason the person isn't performing quite the well they want to is they don't have the ability. They haven't learned enough. They aren't performing adequately they need to do. So what do we do with remedies? And this is the key column to be concerned about. Remedies: train, transfer, redesign, terminate. Okay? If they don't have the abilities and doesn't look like they're never going to have the abilities, you terminate them. Maybe it was that you just didn't train them right on the things that were there. Maybe they just would be better at a different job, and so you transfer them, or perhaps even redesign it. Now, the second one, that's ability. In fact, ability is probably easier to solve than the others. Effort. Now, this one's a tough one. The performance decline because they're not putting the time in, they're not really showing the proactivity that you want. Well, evaluate performance and reward. So, in other words, if you want them to have more effort, you give them more incentives. That's the idea. Or recognize good performance when they do it. So you try and create this model of what you actually want them to do. And then finally is the situation aspect. Is the performance erratic? What's happening? Are there some personal problems and so on? And this may result in like a streamlining work process. Maybe the person needs to work at home for a period of time. Maybe they need to take some time off. Or it might be that we just haven't given them all the tools. Maybe there's some technology that we can give them that would make it more consistent in terms of how they perform. Now, let's say that we get to a point where the appraisal of the person, now this could be happening at any time. When we talk about discipline now, this is at any time. And this is related back to what we discussed earlier in the semester with regards to grievance procedures, early, the process of the non-union aspect of early dispute resolution. Technically, this is how you need to do it. First, you give a person a verbal warning. Now, you may write something in somebody's file or make a note in somebody's digital file that something happened in the process of things of what it was. If it occurs again, then you go to a written warning. Once you get to, typically the magic number is 3 written warnings, then you suspend the employee. And once they come back, if they again get another write-up, then you terminate them. I had to go through a situation when I first came to work for Shangri-La down in Los Angeles with a couple of salespeople who had been there for a long period of time. And part of what I had to do was to terminate them. Unfortunately, it wasn't my job when I went in. I was hoping that they were going to be productive, but when they weren't, that was part of what I had to do, and I had to document that to make sure that we had all of our ducks in a row, if you will. Now, I must say that when you go back to Asia, this is also a process in Asia, but that whole aspect of what you might go through there would be just perhaps a little bit different in my experience, and that termination is maybe a little easier to do in those scenarios. Now, there are other cases where you don't go through all that. There's immediate discharge. Somebody did something dishonest, discourteous or willful, flagrant to a guest. Gross negligence. They completely forgot about something. They didn't lock the door. Something got stolen, whatever it may be. Certainly a fight. If you do like the TV camera that we saw in the grocery store in the past week, and if you're watching this in the future, it was a grocery store manager who a person just came up to and just hit and knocked down and sent him to the hospital in a coma. Under the influence, obviously alcohol, drugs is a big factor today. What most companies are going to do today, however, I think is going to be more of trying to put the person through rehabilitation rather than simply fire them on the spot. I think that's a much more common way to deal with it today. Willful misconduct, sabotage, arson, sleeping on the job, bringing a gun in, that could be one of those issues. Do we allow them? Don't we allow them? All those are immediate discharge. Well, let's talk about more positive aspect. Let's talk about rewards and incentives. Okay, what do we do to get people to perform better and then reward them for it? Right? That's what we all want to be rewarded for, what things that we do right. Well, one way we do is pay for performance. Okay, so a merit pay is how you do stacked up against others in your performance evaluation, for example. Bonuses is another. Sometimes we work on a bonus basis where the person's performance is a certain level. We give them a bonus rather than merit pay. Merit pay would be an increase in pay in your hourly pay, your salary, if you will. Bonuses would be a lump sum. Awards might be another case where you win an award for the employee of the month. Those kind of things would be a pay for performance. But sometimes incentives are not monetary. Sometimes they're non-monetary. It could be that they get a special parking spot for a month or for a year, whatever it might be. It might be that they get a trip or a voucher for exchange for a gift or something of that nature. Doesn't have to be on that basis. Certainly, when you're looking at a company that's moving people fast in the organization, as I can relate to in my days with Marriott, for example, one non-monetary aspect would be the ability to be promoted. You get to move up to the next level, the next job. You're first in line for that. Now, incentives can be both individual and team-based or combined. It could be an aspect of how well you did on your own or how well you did with someone else as part of a group. And that is, as I mentioned, in Asia, that's more common, was more common at least, than the individual incentive. In fact, in Asia, what typically they do, in my experience in working for a company based out of Hong Kong, at least in Shangri-La in those days, is bonuses were given at Chinese New Year. Some of you know the process in China is you give a bonus at Chinese New Year and then everybody goes home to where they're from and they quit. That they stay on until then. In Hong Kong, in the management level, people stay in the job until after Chinese New Year, and then they change jobs because they want that bonus. You get a bonus every year. And it could be based on how many years you worked for the company, and the bonuses were usually 1 month pay, 2 month pay. I remember I was working in the States, and I had two very good salespeople working for me, but one was exceptionally better than the other. And the bonuses came back from the corporate office, and the one who wasn't as good as the other got the 2 month bonus, and the other one won, and I questioned why that was. And they said, because he's worked for the company longer. I went, well, okay, that was a different model than what I had thought, but that's what he was doing. Now, this gives you an example of, again, I'm going back to how we were doing things. The San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau had a very good incentive and reward program when I was there. So if you look at this, the bureau-wide goals, or what you might say would be the team goals, what we were expected to do, counted for 35 points of what your possible 100 points would be. Your qualitative goal and how you did in the performance evaluation, if you will, was 40%. Quantitative goals, which is if you were a salesperson, How many groups did you book? How much business did you bring into the hotel? Whatever it was in terms of that quantitative aspect. And then there were certain core competencies that you had to achieve, and that was 10%. So you would total up all those points. You'd take what the annual incentive available was, you take the percentage of that, and that's what you would earn. So let's say you got 85 points, and you could have earned $10,000, you'd get $8,500. I trust that makes sense. If it didn't, check with your more knowledgeable accounting classmates. I'm sure they'll be able to help you out. And when we talk about qualitative goals, these were some of the example of what was in that 40 points. Team development, this was my position. Well, actually, I'm sorry, that wasn't my position. It was the position that worked for me, the director of marketing. I was the vice president of marketing. Team development, develop the skill sets of marketing services team leaders, the people who worked for them, right? That would be one of the things, supervision, so on. And then there was a measurement of market penetration. How well did they do in supporting the trade shows that we did, our database, e-marketing, public relations, and so on. And then there was an element of research. So in each one of these, as the manager of this director of marketing, I would have to give a qualitative feel for how they did on that. So I would say that person, looking at all that, did a very good job. They're very much in line with there's still some growth. Maybe they got 35 out of the 40 points, something of that nature. And that's how you would base it. So you're making qualitative into a number, but it is not a measure of actual performance by number, if you will. Trust that makes sense. Okay, let's change our direction here a little bit and talk about something a little bit different in terms of this performance and incentive. Why do people leave us? Why is it, if we talked before about what happens when we want to fire somebody, when we want to terminate them, if you will, in the process, or discipline them. But what happens when the employee leaves? Why is it? Why do we lose people? What's the turnover aspect? Well, some of the reasons they leave is they're incompatible with the company culture. The senior vice president of human resources at Commune, when he was at another hotel group in town, Kimpton, in the past, he once told the students in a class of mine that, everyone has a place where they can be successful, but not everyone is successful in every company. So it's not a matter of you're not able to do the job effectively. It's a matter of you don't fit that company culture. So from your perspective, when you're looking at companies that you want to work for out there, you should be thinking about things about how does their corporate culture match with you. A Marriott culture is different than a Hyatt culture. Hilton is different than a Starwood in the hotel side of things, and so on. If people leave because they have unsatisfactory relations with coworkers. They don't get along with their fellow workers. They don't feel their fellow workers are doing the job satisfactorily, or vice versa. Those kind of things can happen. Insufficient support to get the tasks done. You feel like the company isn't funding the things they should, doing the things they should. Inadequate opportunities for growth. A lot of times people move because they were given a higher level position somewhere else. Sometimes just the company isn't big enough to continue to keep giving you a job at the next level. They don't have enough hotels in their system, for example, in the hotel industry. And dissatisfaction with compensation is another. By the way, what a lot of people say is that people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. So we go back to this whole thing about thinking about the company culture or the persons themselves. This is a study that was done a while back of people leaving the restaurant industry, and what they said was job satisfaction was the number one, and it was about co-workers and supervisors. That's what they didn't like. They didn't like those work. Number two was the threat of robbery or physical harm. Especially if you're working in like a fast food restaurant in a transitional part of town, that may not be what you want, or in a late night restaurant, where there could be high crime going home from work, those kind of things. And the third thing, weekend hours. I can't ask you by a show of hands, but how many of you would say that the one thing that you might lead you away from thinking about a career in the restaurant industry, or even the hotel industry, that matter, is weekend hours? If that's what you're thinking, by the way, think about the contract food service. Think about the Compass Groups or the Sodexos or the Aramarks. Those are the companies that work in the corporate food service They don't work on weekends to the same extent that people do in the restaurant industry. The what do we do to keep employees? And this was a study done a number of years ago now by the National Restaurant Association, but I think these are all very relevant. Increase starting wages of new employees, that's one way. Today we might think about that issue of full-time versus part-time based on the ACA that we've been talking about, that 29, 30 hours in terms of benefits. Expand employee training programs, expand recruitment efforts for new employees. Where might they do that? Yes, USF, right? And expand the benefits package. I don't know whether that weight might be a little higher now, that people might be thinking about that more. Certainly top of the mind type awareness. How do we combat this? How do we make sure that we keep our employees? The old adage of retention being the most important things. Well, training programs, and we've been talking about that previously during the semester, training programs to solve problems, seek out information, interact with employees. Have a clear career path. Let the employee know what the future is for them, no matter what their position is in the operation. Let them know what that future is. Empowerment, I think, particularly in our culture here in the United States, is the ability to feel that you can make that decision. If you're a non-union operation, profit sharing and stock options, certainly in my early days with Marriott, that was a big plus, the ability to have the ability to buy stock and have stock in that company. Incentives, we've already talked about those, various incentives in terms of what you have, and a big factor for both men and women, excuse me, but certainly more for the women's side of it, for all of you who want to have families but still continue your career, is what are you going to do about childcare? And that's a big dilemma in our industry. Now, the last thing I want to cover with regards to this is a unique way of measuring not just the individual now, but measuring the overall effect of the company culture and what's going on. And that's the employee survey. Typically, you do these on an annual basis. And the first time you do it, it's just a benchmark. So it doesn't really tell you a lot. It might tell you where some of your problem areas are, but it doesn't tell you good, bad, or indifferent so much. It just tells you a benchmark. But as you continue to keep doing them year after year, they start to become a benchmark of what areas are improving and what aren't. And I'll give you an idea of what that's about, again, using another example from the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I have others that I can share with you, and hopefully our group that's doing the performance evaluation interview and presentation will ask some of these questions about what they do along these lines and find out some of that from some of those companies. But these were the categories, and I'm not going to go into these, a huge number of categories here. That this was a fairly extensive survey that was done, but people, both in a group standpoint and an individual standpoint, you did it both. They listened to what you had to say, and then they gave you a survey. So let's take a certain part of it, and let's look at communication. So what you have here is you have a number of different questions or variables, if you will, within the area of communications. I don't receive conflicting orders from above. I do not receive. That's kind of a strange question, but that's what they asked. I feel the results of this survey will be carefully studied and action will be taken. In other words, if you're looking at all these tell you about how, let's say, work down to the next to the last one, when employees provide input and communication with senior team leaders, management really does listen. So these are things about overall what we think communication is about. Now, how you use this is you look at the overall value of communication, and then you look back at each individual item here and you say, is there anything within these areas of communication that we're not doing as well as others? So maybe that one on when employees provide input and communicate with senior team leaders, management really listens. Maybe they don't think that's the case. So if they don't think that's the case, then maybe that's something you need to work on, even though they feel that the rest of it is positive. So you can take that apart. Here's another. Culture, climate, job satisfaction. Remember, these are the things we talked about, why people leave. Right? So we looked at the norms. Do they really care what happens? Are they proud of it? What's the climate? And the idea is that they had color codes on this. So let's say the first year that you did it, maybe you were in the yellow area. You weren't red. You weren't in a problem, but it wasn't as good as it maybe should have been against a benchmark that that company doing it had set. So the next year, your idea is you want to move yourself into the green area. So you work on things as an organization all the way through that year to get you there, so that people think that that's what's happening and they feel that's happening. Down there towards the bottom again, I'm satisfied with the office cleanliness. This was a big issue. They weren't the first time this was done. So the CEO was after the mailroom guy. And the mailroom guy, he thought, didn't keep the place clean enough. And so he was the lowest paid person in the operation, but he was keying on that guy because of this survey. It was really kind of comical to us in a way. Another way would be fairness and equity. It's another way to look at it. You know, how are the people? And now you're getting down to your department and to your department chair and not necessarily the whole operation. And then you look at this one. This is about the senior management, all the key people. Now, when I first started there, they had already done their first survey, and everything there was based on the previous vice president of marketing. So in my department, it was really difficult to manage because they were giving me problems they had with my predecessor rather than the positive stuff of what maybe I was doing, hopefully, at that point. And then finally, human resources and business operations, what this course is about. Okay, I feel free to go to the director of business operations, who also, in this case, was human resources, if I have a problem with my supervisor. The director of business operations is timely in response to my questions. I'm satisfied with the new hire. So the idea of an employee survey is to look at the overall company culture. Going back to where we began, we started with the performance appraisal, or the performance evaluation of the individual. And we looked at that both from the individual and the team standpoint. So what this is doing is taking it to the next level and looking at the organization by itself. So putting all these different measures in place, you can see that there's a lot of different ways that you might go about accomplishing your objective of making sure that performance is what you expected it to be. And that should end this lecture. Thank you.